Welcome to Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange community, where leading practitioners in integrative health approaches will discuss how they solve the most challenging and common health issues. These regular Q&A discussions are designed to take a deep dive into case studies and integrative approaches in order to elevate the collective knowledge of both experienced and new practitioners alike. Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange, your community for functional medicine.
All right, welcome to the Health Intelligence Exchange, everyone. This week our guest is Dr. Kia Michael, and we'll be digging into Unlock Natural Relief, exploring clinically tested sleep, pain, and anxiety formulations with MDBio. Dr. Kia, thanks for joining us, but make sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening so you never miss an episode. And for those of you joining us live, feel free to post comments or questions in the chat wherever you're watching, and we'll get to those questions at the end of this conversation. Dr. Kia is an accomplished urological oncological surgeon with expertise in robotic surgery and minimally invasive therapeutic modalities for the treatment of urological cancers. Dr. Michael sought out internationally for his medical expertise. He founded the prestigious Comprehensive Urology Medical Group located at Cedars-Sinai Medical Tower in Los Angeles. After starting his medical practice in Los Angeles, he founded several medically related businesses, including La Pierre Surgery Center, Path MD, and Advanced Radiation Center of Beverly Hills. All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Sorry about the marble mouth. Appreciate you being here. All right. So maybe first question, can you share how your expertise in urological oncology and minimally invasive surgery has influenced your interest in natural and plant-based medicine for treating conditions like sleep disturbances, pain, and anxiety?
From our perspective, just taking care of patients is really where it's at. So as you have a relatively mature practice, you get to see many different walks of life, many patients with many different medical conditions. And apart from their urological conditions, they'll still start to share with you, sleeping issues that they have, pain issues that they have. And when you start to inquire, people will share with you what's actually happening with them. So it's not so much the urology, but it's just really having a wonderful connection with so many patients over the years. And you start to see that the incidence of sleeping disorders, chronic pain, anxiety, and stress is just massive. And when we start to talk to our patients, we start to realize that many people were self-medicating using pharmaceutical alternatives, and some of them with very good success. And that's what really opened up the conversation for us to try and find alternative to opioids and benzodiazepines, which you all know have so many potential side effects. And right now, as a country, we're dealing with so many of the ramifications of the opioid epidemic really in the country. So it was very important for us to be able to offer other things to patients that we could actually, again, avoid the use of narcotics or minimize the use of narcotics in particular. And for patients that needed chronic use of medications such as benzodiazepines, for us to be able to provide them alternatives. And that's what really started us on our journey to take a look at natural formulations to see if they could potentially work and reduce the need for some of the pharmaceutical medications that we just discussed. So the interesting thing is that really opened up our eyes. We started to realize that many of the natural compounds can be effective, but the eloquence really comes into how those formulations are actually put together in order for them to be bioavailable, in order for them to actually be effective in large cohorts of patients. And what was interesting for us is when we start to take a look at the nutraceutical segment, we saw that there are many, many options for patients to choose. But when we started to dig in deeper, we realized very few formulations are ever clinically tested. And of the ones that undergo any testing, very few of them actually show any clinical efficacy. So we realized that these plants and plant-based formulations can be highly effective, but there are very few that have actually been proven to be clinically safe and to be clinically effective. And that's what started to gain our interest, because we said, look, there's a huge, huge need in this market because people are looking for pharmaceutical alternatives We know that many of these compounds can be effective. The question is, how can you put them together? How can you deliver them so that they're safe and effective? And how can you really make sure that the claims are valid, and make sure that they actually go through clinical testing? And that's what really created MDBio, is to be able to fill that gap so patients can have alternatives to benzodiazepines and opioids. People can have natural remedies to help them go to sleep and stay in sleep and have improved quality of life. Again, formulations to help people minimize their stress and anxiety, and for those with chronic pain to again be able to minimize that, and not necessarily just to take this path of using anti-inflammatories daily with significant potential side effects, or to be on the opioid pathway with high likelihood of really just addiction, which can follow down the line. So that's how this all started, is just by speaking to the patients, and it just evolved to what I just mentioned to you.
Yeah, and that's amazing. Most of our practitioners are, I don't want to say the term anti-pain medications, but definitely always thinking about, what are pharmaceutical or natural alternatives to pharmaceuticals. But maybe kind of given your clinical research background, where did you start when thinking about the formulations, and how, where did kind of the inspiration come from, and how did you get to what the formulation is today before we get to kind of the clinical efficacy side?
Definitely. We started to do a lot of research in regards to compounds that had individually shown a lot of promise, whether it's for pain, anxiety, inflammation, or basically within those spectra. So once we started to take a look at that, we started to do a lot of research in terms of work that had been done in the past. And based on that, it gave us a good academic start in regards to, what would be some of the key compounds to be able to put in there, and then for us to start to think about formulations. What we were very lucky with is we reached out and started to consult with really some of the top formulators, and then came up with a whole host of formulations. And what we were able to do as clinicians is we created a clinical research infrastructure. We created the IT platform in order for us to be able to assess really in quick time what patients' responses and clinical outcomes were, both in terms of clinical efficacy as well as identifying any potential side effects. And by being able to do that, we're able to take a look at a number of different formulations very quickly in a larger observational cohorts. And that's what allowed us to identify, look, which of these formulations actually show significant promise. But what was interesting is we realized that the ratios of these compounds made a huge difference. And sometimes it was complete opposite of what we thought would be effective. Certain things that we thought in high concentrations would actually be more effective, proved to be actually less effective. So what we've learned is the synergistic effect of a multitude of these compounds is really what works best. And unlike pharma, whereby we identify and purify a particular compound and give it in high doses, we've started to realize that by using the synergy of multiple naturally occurring substances, if you're able to formulate them together, put the right ratios together, then you can actually have clinical significance. And by doing our own observational studies, we started to identify the formulations that held the most promise. And that's when we went to third-party clinical testing for the different formulations that we thought could be most effective for patients.
Yeah, no, and I think that's, really impressive. When I first kind of got exposed to MDBio and kind of your guys' approach, is it follows more, it follows more of a traditional pharmaceutical approach in terms of identifying the compound and then putting it into a trial to determine efficacy, rather than just kind of bringing it to market and seeing what happens. So
Exactly.
I'd love to hear you elaborate on the trial of 620 individual participants. What were the key findings? And then, what were you looking for in terms of validating the efficacy of those kind of, that optimal formulation approach?
Absolutely. So as you've seen, Jeremy, of the different formulations that undergo any clinical testing, only 1% to 2% show any clinical efficacy. and they typically will show clinical efficacy for just really one particular condition. And when we had done our own internal observation, we felt that our sleep formulation was going to be highly effective. And when we took it through clinical trials, we ran the largest non-melatonin sleep study in the history of the US. So we were called by the clinical research organization. They said, look, we just called everybody in because we thought there was a mistake, because we've had now over 100 different formulations from various different companies that in this round underwent testing. None of them showed any clinical efficacy, but yours did. And they said, what was interesting is that most of the time we see that there's a little bit of clinical efficacy, but still clinically efficacious for maybe a one indication. Yours was very effective for 4 different indications. So we thought there may be a mistake. But when we brought everybody to the table, we realized, no, it's not a mistake. You're sitting on a phenomenal product. So they shared with us that not only the sleep quality had actually improved for our patients, but patients, because they were sleeping better, their stress and anxiety levels had actually gone down. And what was interesting is that in a clinically, statistically significant manner, their quality of life measures had actually improved because of the sleep formulation. So we looked at that and we were absolutely ecstatic. And that's what then got us to continue to validate some of our other formulations, mainly for pain and ultimately for anxiety, that we also took through clinical testing. And as you have indicated, we've ran the 3 largest clinical studies, each in its own division. So for pain, we've ran the largest non-opioid clinical study in the history of the US. And for the anxiety formulation, we've ran the largest non-benzodiazepine clinical study in the history of the US in our sector. So altogether, between 4,000 to 5,000 patients have been actually tested on our formulations. So the amount of data that we have, the amount of understanding that we have has really been tremendous. And what was interesting is we went back with our pain formulation and they called us and said, look, we don't know what the heck you're doing, but this stuff is really working great. And what was interesting for the pain formulation is said not only is it effective for just pain at large, but for neuropathic pain, which, as you well know, is a very difficult type of a pain to control, which is basically nerve pain. We showed fantastic efficacy in that realm as well. So we got 2 clinical indications for the pain formulation that we actually brought through a third-party clinical testing. And so we were super excited about what we had done. And what was interesting is we went back to them and said, look, we really want to bring our stress and anxiety formulation through testing as well. And they said, look, we strongly recommend you reconsider that because placebo effect for stress and anxiety can be so high to prove clinical efficacy becomes very difficult in this particular sector. But we looked at our own internal data. We're like, no, our data is really tremendous, and we think this is going to be effective. And we took it through the third-party clinical testing. And again, for the stress and anxiety, they called us, said, look, this is also proving out to be clinically effective, not only for reducing stress and anxiety, but by doing so in a clinically significant manner, many patients are actually sleeping much, much better. So it's been a really beautiful journey. But I think to your point, Jeremy, what's been really unique and fruitful for us is really applying pharmaceutical standards to the nutraceutical sector, whereby we're really able to bring in the best of both worlds. So applying the scientific rigor to naturally occurring substances and formulations, that really is what has made a big difference for us, because we're not guessing, we're not hoping that these formulations are effective. In the largest studies performed in the country to date, we have shown incredible clinical efficacy because of the scientific process and rigor that we've actually applied to it. The blend of the pharmaceutical approach but using nutraceuticals has been really amazing for us for the following reason. Not only are these compounds and these formulations clinically effective, but what's great is the side effect profile, unlike pharmaceutical products, and our formulations have been very, very low. When we compared our side effect profile to placebo, or side effect profile was only 1% higher than placebo in the studies that we actually performed. So what that's allowed us to do is really to bring pharmaceutical alternatives for three sectors: sleep, pain, anxiety. And what's interesting for us is that the standard pharmaceuticals that are being used for these sectors are, again, opioids and benzodiazepines. So for us to be able to, in earnest, have an alternative to opioids, to have an alternative to benzodiazepines, makes us so happy, because there's so many patients just in the country as well as globally that can benefit from these formulations and not necessarily go down this path of a potential addiction. I'll just segue into a really interesting story. I was talking about what we actually have with a colleague, and he said, look, one of my closest friends, he works for the Secret Service, and he hurt his knee, and as a result went on some opioids, and now months later he just can't get off of them. So imagine if somebody of that caliber could actually use something apart from an opioid to be able to help with their chronicity of the pain, and just be functional. And we've seen so many stories of our patients get off of opioids, get off of benzodiazepines, and really improve their quality of life. So for us, it's been so far a very, very rewarding journey.
Yeah, it's amazing. So kind of digging into that and thinking about it from a practitioner perspective, the next person kind of walks in the door, chronic pain, nuts, sleep and anxiety. How do you think, when you work with your individual patients, how do you think about, what's the profile? How do you kind of set the recommendations and the titration for the individual product? Or like maybe walk through a case study of somebody that you've worked with recently and how you've actually applied it in practice.
Absolutely. As in every situation, getting the pertinent history is really the most important thing, which is, why is that particular person in pain? Because ultimately, we've got to figure out what the underlying issue or issues are so that we can address them, hopefully relieve them, so that that person doesn't need to use any formulation, including ours, long term. And so that's our goal. So depending on the body part, depending on the underlying issue, whether it's physical therapy or other adjunctive things that we can actually help that person in terms of quality of life changes, in terms of, again, any supportive measures that we can actually provide them, because the goal has to be that, look, we would like that person to be independently healthy. The question is, what can we do with the interventions that we have available, including some of the formulations that we can provide them, to be able to bridge that time gap until that person is healthy enough not to live with chronic pain. So that's key. Then what we take a look, and we tell all of our patients, we say, look, everyone's chemistry is a little bit different. And in each of these segments, we have two different formulations. And between the two of them, the great majority, I would say probably about 90% of patients will respond to them. So what we strongly recommend for patients to use when using the MDBio formulations is to start with 2 tablets, and see how they respond. And we ask them to give it a few days. And if 2 tablets proves to be too strong, go down to 1. If 2 is not enough, go to 3. And what I ask all my patients to do is, after they've tried these formulations for about 2 weeks, even if they're getting fantastic results, I also want them to try the other formulation. Why? Because everyone's clinical chemistry is going to be different. So they may actually respond to one or the other better, and they just don't know until they've actually tried it. So by using this methodology, which is 2 formulations, starting with 2 tablets or 2 of the gel caps, and titrating after a few days, either up or down by 1, we've been able to, again, help close to about 90% of our patients that come back and say, look, it's really made a big difference for them. And what we see are a few different cohorts of patients. There are patients who, for example, are on opioids that will tell us, look, I'm not needing to use opioids anymore, which is phenomenal. And then we have another cohort of patients that say, look, I'm using opioids, but a lot less than I needed to. I'm using lower dosages, lower milligrams, less frequent. And by doing so, they're getting on a pathway that they can potentially get off of the opioids. The same thing we've actually seen also with the benzodiazepines. So for a number of our patients that we've used these formulations for anxiety, for example, the beautiful part is that patients come back and say, you know what, I've been able to get off of my, for example, Xanax. And what's been beautiful is that I'm able to think through my issues and problems and not feel high. And I'm very
Mhm.
much in control, but I'm now calm. The fact that I'm calm, I'm able to actually address a number of the issues. So I become much more functional in resolving daily stressors, family stresses, work stressors, and so forth. And likewise, for patients that are taking the formulations for sleep, again, same recommendation because each one of them has two different formulations, which is to start with two gel caps before going to sleep. And then after a few days, either bumping it up to three or to one or keeping it to two based on the response. And the beautiful feedback that we've actually had, I can't tell you how many of our patients who only could go to sleep using Ambien, Xanax, temazepam, and so forth are completely off of them. And they come back and they say, you know what's interesting is my quality of sleep is so much better on the MDBio formulations. I wake up, I'm not fatigued, I don't have a hangover feeling, I feel very well rested. And as our studies have shown, when patients sleep better, their quality of life measures go away because of a lot of stress and anxiety actually resolves when good sleep is there. So we found
Mhm.
that sleep is just a major pillar of health at large. And by being able to help patients not just go to sleep, as many medications do, but improve their quality of sleep, those patients end up just showing up much bigger in life. So that restful sleep is incredibly important.
Yeah. And that, everybody that's listening it absolutely, believes in the power and the importance of sleep. In terms of kind of thinking about that patient that, is using a Xanax to go to sleep, is there like you know, a ramp in, ramp out type of approach? Like, what does that look like? What are the key indicators that somebody would be looking for to seeing the effectiveness and benefit?
So what we've recommended to patients is, whoever their consulting physician is that is actually given the Xanax, just let them know that look, they're using an alternative.
Hmm.
And for them, I'll share with you what many patients have done. They've actually just lowered their dose of the Xanax initially to, for example, a half, and they
Hmm.
take some of our formulations. But what's been very interesting for us is a lot of what the patients have done, they've actually done on their own, which is for the patients, this is for sleep. The patients that were using Xanax to go to sleep, they just don't take it. And they just go onto the sleep formulation. And very quickly, they're sleeping really, really well and not needing the Xanax as needed to go to sleep.
Hmm.
The bigger question is going to be patients that are on Xanax chronically for stress and anxiety. And for those patients, we say, look, please make sure that you actually speak with who your prescribing physician is. But if we were to help them get off of these benzodiazepines, typically what we would do is lower the dose, typically by about a half, and let them just sit there for about a week, maybe two,
Hmm.
as they basically start to enjoy some of the benefits of the MDBio formulations for stress. And depending on their results, then cutting down the benzodiazepines again, another half until they're at just a negligible milligram dose, and hopefully they can just get off of it altogether. So for those patients that are using it chronically, lowering the dose slowly seems to be very effective, and supplanting that with the MDBio stress formulation, which is the calm formulation. But for the sleep, the interesting thing is that for a lot of those patients, they have not needed to actually lower their dose in the evening hours. Instead of using Xanax or Ambien or some other benzodiazepine to go to sleep, they've simply used our formulation and it works pretty well for them. And they've really not had the need to ramp down.
Hmm. Um, I don't, as much as you can, our practitioner would love to know kind of what's in the formulations, and then also, part of MDBio's emphasis is around using all natural, non-GMO, cruelty-free ingredients. why is this important? Why did you guys choose to go that route in terms of kind of the safety and side effects?
So what's interesting is that we realize that not all naturally occurring substances are equal. So sourcing of these compounds became very, very important to us. So we saw that some of the ingredients that you could get, in a multitude of places, we had access to, but we started to realize as we dug in deeper that the quality of some of the distributors was very, very different. So we decided that for us, what was most important is quality through and through. So we really buy the most expensive and best quality natural products that we can find because we've seen that that quality really makes a difference in terms of the bioavailability and the efficacy across the board. And from our perspective, we believe that I'll share with you a very interesting story. I was down in Mexico. We were going for a walk, and a gentleman who was leading the walk says, "Look, be careful of this particular leaf because if you touch it, it's going to really bother your skin." And I said, "What is that?" He goes, "That's poison ivy." And I asked him, I said, "Look, what happens if somebody actually touches that and they actually get a skin reaction?" He said, "You see that other plant over there?" He goes, "This will remedy the issues with the poison ivy." So it was a very interesting story for me because it just showed me that in nature, we really have the proper balances. We just have to be able to find it. So if we're able to just respect that paradigm, that look, the answers are there. We just have to be able to apply, a more rigorous scientific um, kind of process to it. We can actually start to find those remedies all around us. And in doing so, to your point, we have to be the shepherds of providing top quality through and through. And part of that is again making sure that the sourcing of your materials is top notch. The way that these different plants have actually been raised and developed is top notch, and obviously that we're providing a benefit to many by using a great sourced material.
Mhm. Um, Given your kind of academic and clinical achievements, what advice would you give to other practitioners looking to kind of incorporate these formulations into their therapeutic practice? And in more kind of a little bit more context, when we think about functional and integrative, nutraceuticals is obviously a critical component, even beyond kind of the MDBio products. Like, how does it fit within like a probiotic and other items as well?
So, from our perspective, what's really beautiful and what we're seeing is that more and more people are looking for natural alternatives that can actually help them. So, fantastic. What we're
Mhm.
also seeing it on the practitioner side is that more and more practitioners are really being awakened to the fact that there are alternatives to pharmaceuticals that can work particularly well. The number one thing that I would say, again, as stewards of our patients' health, is to make sure that what you're recommending is really clinically tested because there are a lot of formulations out there, a lot of great packaging, excuse me, out there. A lot of the formulations are based on compounds that are in them that have shown promise in other clinical studies, but it doesn't make that formulation effective. So just because you have some of the ingredients that in other studies have been effective, that does not equate to that formulation being effective. So it's really on us to make sure that we do the research, making sure that the formulations that we're actually recommending are safe and very effective. Otherwise, we're really recommending placebos to a lot of people, which will have some effect because of placebo effect. But if we truly want to be able to provide pharmaceutical alternatives, we truly have to be able to recommend products that have clinical testing and have been shown to be clinically efficacious.
Mhm.
As that happens, and therefore we're able to gain our own trust and the trust of our patients because now we're recommending tested and proven formulations to them, and therefore that equates with them doing much better. I truly believe that the entire sector will become more and more robust because it's no longer, oh, I think it's a naturally occurring substance, so who knows if this really works, versus no, these are clinically tested, same scientific rigor that's been applied to the pharmaceuticals is
Mhm.
now being applied to the nutraceuticals. And now we can stand tall and say, look, we actually have formulations that are very effective. And that really starts to win the trust of the public, the trust of our patients. And therefore, as a sector, we can continue to do better and better as these scientific and clinical adoptions become common practice for really every formulation that we start to recommend, which
Mhm.
is prove to me that this works, prove to me you've had a large sample size, and prove to me that the side effect profiles are low. Once we see that, as we do the same thing in the pharmaceutical world, where every time I take a look at a potential pharmaceutical that I can prescribe, I have to do that diligence. Let me understand the studies. Prove to me that this is clinically efficacious. Prove to me the safety profile and show me the dosing mechanisms that I can use for my patients. The same standard has to be applied to the nutraceutical world. And we've demonstrated that that's very possible. Very effective formulations are there if we do things in a correct manner, which is really to apply the scientific and pharmaceutical rigor to the nutraceutical sector.
Yeah. I think that's one of the unique things about MDBio that is super interesting is oftentimes when we think about supplements, they're citing research on a compound and then attributing it to their product, whereas kind of the clinical research you've done is actually on the product formulation itself in an actual trial setting, which is very unique. So very exciting to kind of see you guys pushing that that bar of acceptance forward and getting more of the kind of scientific rigor behind what you do in terms of actually testing from the outcome perspective. I'm not sure if we touched on this. Would it be possible to kind of talk about some of the improvements that you saw in the interventional arm, just from a percentage of improvement type of thing?
Absolutely. I'll give you some rough numbers. When we looked at our sleep formulation, close to about 60% of patients started to tell us that their sleep quality had actually gone up. And commensurate with that and similar numbers, we saw that the anxiety levels had actually improved, the stress levels had improved. When we took a look at the pain formulation, about 70% of the patients actually showed significant improvement in terms of their pain. And for neuropathic pain, over 50% of those patients were sharing with us that their neuropathic pain had significantly improved. So, and
Mhm.
as you know, neuropathic pain is a very, very challenging type of pain to be able to take care of, including when people are using opioids. And then what was interesting is we looked at the anxiety formulation, where close to about 80% of the patients came back and they said, look, stress management is so much better. The anxiety is under so much better control. And a significant number, close to about 70% of them are actually sleeping better as well. So those are rough numbers off the top of my head, but those were the results that we had. What's interesting is we have another set of formulations coming through, again, purely botanicals, where our own internal observations show that they're equally, if not more effective
Mhm.
than the formulations we've already taken through clinical testing. And the reason that's important is that between these two formulations, the ones that have been tested and the ones that are going to undergo testing, we feel that the likelihood of us being able to help patients with any of these categories, including sleep, chronic pain, as well as anxiety and stress, that most probably 80, 90+% of the patients who fit in these categories can respond to one of the two formulations that we have in each sector.
Yeah. Um, and I have an interesting question for you, just out of curiosity. So obviously, you still are in Cedars-Sinai. You're in traditional medical care and oncology and urology. What do your peers say to you when you say that you run a clinically proven supplement brand that aren't necessarily open to the impact of supplementation? How do you navigate that conversation?
So, the way that we as physicians, as MDs, have actually been trained through, medical school and so forth is, there's there's obviously a huge emphasis on pharmaceutical products, and for good reason, because they've been tested, and we've been trained that look, only recommend what you know has been tried and true, and the data is behind it. If the data is not there, you can't really make any particular claims. So, and I think there's a tremendous amount of importance to that. That in medicine, we want to make sure that what we recommend is based on fact, and is based on science, and that's been proven, again, as the steward of people's health. So when you apply the same paradigm to nutraceuticals, we have to realize that these are all compounds, whether it's a pharmaceutical compound, and remember that over half of the pharmaceutical compounds have been purification of plant based compounds. So take a look at aspirin, a number of the different chemotherapeutic agents they've used. A lot of these things, number of antibiotics, these have all come from nature, but they've just been purified, cleansed, or slightly modified, and then delivered with great bioavailability. So when we step back, remember that not all pharmaceuticals are just chemically synthesized. Many of them have been purified from just nature. So there's been a lot of skepticism for the nutraceutical sector, mainly because there are very few scientifically reviewed and assessed formulations. Therefore, it becomes easy to say, look, if you don't have the data, you can't make any claims. And you know what? They're right. Because if you've not done the clinical studies, if you've not shown proven the clinical efficacy, there are a lot of holes in potential claims that can be made. However, when you apply that scientific and pharmaceutical rigor to nutraceuticals, it's difficult to then refute that, because you can't have a bias that, well, this is a naturally occurring substance. So a lot of the pharmaceuticals, this is a nutraceutical that has been tested very similarly to what pharmaceuticals undergo in terms of testing and assessment and quality of production. When we present that data, there's no pushback, because they're like, look, this is amazing. And so when we actually talk to our colleagues who were very, very skeptical, and we show them the science, they're like, guys, this is incredible. They're sometimes more excited than we are, because they really see the global application and the fact that these are incredibly safe. It's really just changing the paradigm of going forward, how we can potentially help our patients. And from our perspective as practitioners, we have to be agnostic. It doesn't really matter, who made it. What's more important is that we're providing effective and safe alternatives to our patients. Sometimes the pharmaceuticals are going to work way, way better. Sometimes they're going to be natural remedies that will work just as well, if not better, with less side effect profiles. But to answer your question, the fact that we've applied so much science and pharmaceutical rigor to our formulations, that removes all pushback. And what it actually has started to do is opening up the concepts for many of our colleagues, that it's interesting that naturally occurring formulations can be highly effective and very safe for their patients. And now they're talking to us about, look, can we use these formulations for our patients? And the answer is absolutely. Because how awesome if somebody comes in as the first line, you don't give an opioid, but you give them a very safe, non-addictive remedy for their pain. The same thing for sleep and anxiety, where again, the potential of opioid addiction, the potential benzodiazepine addiction is removed. I mean, that's just a game changer in terms of how we're taking care of patients today.
Yeah.
And in earnest, many, many clinicians want alternatives, but they've been waiting for alternatives that really work and have been shown, not because I say it works, because in large randomized placebo double-blinded studies, they have shown great clinical efficacy and safety. That's what's been missing. And that's what's exciting at MDBio, is that we've been able to bring that scientific rigor to the nutraceutical sector, which I think is ultimately going to help patients, as well as provide more tools for practitioners across the board to take care of patients. Because these these ailments, sleep, pain, anxiety, are ubiquitous. Probably about 40+% of the patient population has one of these three, if not a combination of those three clinical conditions.
Yeah, amazing. Well, listen, this has been a great discussion. I want to make sure that we get to our audience questions today. If you're watching live, post your questions in the comments. If you're watching as a replay, you can still post your questions. We'll make sure we get it over to Dr. Michelle. First question, Shelley asked, what are some practical ways health professionals can incorporate MDBio's natural products into their existing treatment plans dealing with sleep disturbances? And I think one thing that came to mind, and you kind of touched on earlier, is people may be recommending melatonin for sleep disturbances. So how would the MDBio sleep product fit in?
So from our perspective, when we take a look in regards to efficacious formulations, again, naturally occurring formulations, we find that there are very few that have strong clinical data. Melatonin, when you talk to your patients, in our experience, has been a little bit effective, but as you all know, the chronicity of use of melatonin, it can actually throw off the normal melatonin production rhythm within a patient. So we particularly never recommend it for prolonged use. So what we see is that, look, if you have formulations that are highly effective for your patients and you're happy with them, fantastic. If you want to use the MDBio formulations, or if you have formulations that may be somewhat effective, but you want something that's more effective, try the MDBio formulations. And essentially what patients do is before going to sleep, they take 2 gel caps. We ask them to give themselves between 3 to 4 days to see how they respond to that particular formulation. And if they feel they need something a little bit stronger, just go up to 3. If you feel like, look, I need less than the 2, just go down to 1. And I can tell you myself, I use our own botanical formulation. And what's been interesting is for the past few months, I've been sleeping 8 hours a night, but I wake up just tired. I went in, got evaluated for sleep apnea. I had a whole bunch of different tests run on me. Everything was normal. So I started to use literally 1 gel cap of our botanical formulation, and I was sleeping the same number of hours, but I wake up fresh and I feel that I just got better quality sleep. So the reason I say that is the duration of sleep is a factor, but the quality of sleep is perhaps even more important. And what we have at MDBio is that in short order, we'll be able to connect with patients' wearables, or a ring, iWatches, and so forth, Fitbit and so forth. So we're going to be able to capture a patient's data as they sleep, so that we're able to, again, show the patients what the difference is in terms of the REM cycle, the quality of sleep improvement. But to come back to your initial question, what I recommend to my own patients is try both formulations, each for about 2 weeks, and see which formulation is more effective for you. What we've seen is that patients that may respond to the MDBio formulation for sleep, when they use the other one, sometimes the other one, even though the first one was effective, the other one's even more effective for them. So our recommendation is try each of the formulation for 2 weeks, starting at 2 gel caps before going to sleep, and then titrating it up to 3 or 1 as needed. And regardless of the response, try the other one. And that way we can see what's best for them. The other thing that at MDBio we actually have, which is available for free for all patients, is that we have a health improvement program whereby through an app, we basically interact with patients just so that we can assess their quality of sleep. And we can also help them with the titration up or down. We're able to capture that data. And for different physicians and clinicians that work with us, we're able to provide that patient data to them so they can see how their patients are doing, that they actually have objective data in terms of the improvement of the quality and not just the duration of their patient's sleep.
Awesome. All right. Next question, Dr. Hammond asked, can you discuss the role of full spectrum hemp in MDBio's formulations and how it contributes to the overall effectiveness of the product?
Very good question. When we got into this, we truly felt that the full spectrum hemp was going to be the key factor for sleep. And it turns out that's not the case. We had a number of different formulations with higher concentrations of the hemp extract, they were actually less effective. So we realized that a small amount of the full spectrum hemp is actually more effective with our formulations and cofactors. And interestingly, our formulations that have no full spectrum hemp extract whatsoever in them, in our initial studies are just as, if not more effective than some of the formulations with a full spectrum extract.
And the last question, how do you determine appropriate dosage for patients when using MDBio's natural formulation, especially for those with severe symptoms?
So we realize that it's not the severity of the symptoms, it's really the metabolic profile of the patient. So I can have a lot of pain, but the question is, how do I actually biodegrade the compounds I'm putting in my body? Therefore, our recommendation is the same. Start with 2 and then go up to 3 or 1 as needed. Now, there's some patients that will tell you, look, I am very, very sensitive to any medication I take. Based on that feedback, that they're telling me exactly what their metabolic profile is like. Start them on 1, and you can always go up a little bit more slowly. So start them on 1, keep everybody at the same level for at least 3 days before you bump them up or down. So that's probably the best recommendation I can make.
And then, sorry, one more question. Raywin asked, I'm curious about the formulation for anxiety. Has it been shown to work with people with PTSD or nervous system dysregulation?
Good question. So we studied close to about 2,000 patients with stress and anxiety disorders, but I cannot tell you specifically within those sub cohorts how they will work out. What I can share with you is that we basically had patients with anxiety across the board at a pretty significant number, close to about 2,000 participants, and across the board, about 75 to 80% of them were responding. So that would tell me there's a good likelihood that patients also with PTSD, for example, can respond to this. But I don't have data specifically for that smaller cohort.
No. Okay. Well, listen, I know we're at time. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank all of you who joined us today and those who asked questions. If you're watching this as a replay, you can definitely post those questions in the comments and we'll make sure they get answered. Thank you again, Dr. Michel, for joining us today. So where can people find out more about you and work with you and the MDBio products?
So we are at MDBioWellness.com, and we have a myriad of different formulations, all clinically tested, that we have. And you can reach out to us at any point. If you're a practitioner, you'd like to work with us, we'd love to be able to provide you the resources. If patients that need to actually connect to us, happy to do so. So MDBioWellness.com, and perhaps you can also share that. I think it looks like you're already doing that. So that's a wonderful place to start.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to have all the links in the replays, both on our community site and on the YouTube channel. Make sure we can get practitioners hooked up with you guys as well. Thank you again. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any of our live streams. Make sure to join us next Tuesday at 10 a.m. for our biweekly best practices and our coffee circle the following Thursday. And then again in 2 weeks where we have Dr. Amy Horniman on, the thyroid fixer, and we're super excited to have her on as well. But thank you, Dr. Michel. Appreciate you joining us today.
Jeremy. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.